Hey, what's up guys? Brian from Zombie Guitar here. Here in this video I just want to give you 5 quick tips that I think you can incorporate into your playing that will most likely help you out, because I know that these things help me out. Not everyone's going to agree with all 5 of these things, but check them out, see if they are for you, try them out, see if you like it. Let's get started. Okay, so the first quick tip that I like to incorporate myself is to, when I'm doing vibrato, so vibrato is just a series of bends and release. So instead of pushing to do the bend and then releasing, push, release, push, release, push, release, I instead like to pull and then release. I used to do it the push, release, but once I switched it up to pull, release, I realized that my vibrato became a lot more controlled and a lot easier to do. So I have a looped progression here. It's in the key of A minor. So I'm just going to be noodling around kind of in this little 5th to 8th fret region here, maybe jumping into some neighboring pentatonic positions, but mostly just doing the A minor pentatonic scale as I kind of walk through these 5 different tips in this video. So take a look at how I do this vibrato by these pulls. So. Alright, so my vibrato is not the best, I know that, but it got a lot better once I started doing the pulls. Like I started going as opposed to doing this. It just, for some reason, I could never get the control that I was looking for when I was pushing, releasing, pushing, releasing. As soon as I started pulling, releasing, my vibrato, it just seemed to get better and more controlled. Obviously, you can't do that once you're on the high E string, because if you try and pull, it'll come off of the fretboard, but you can still do it for the remaining 5 strings. So for all of the 5 strings, other than the high E string, pull, release, try that out. If you're not already doing that, maybe it'll help your vibrato, because I know that it helped mine. So that's the first thing. Okay, so the second quick tip is to, whenever possible, use multiple fingers on the same string when you are bending or doing vibrato. So obviously you can't do this with your first finger because you don't have any fingers behind it, but if you're using your second finger or your third finger or even your pinky, let's say you're on the 7th fret of the G string here, with your third finger, you have these other 2 fingers available that you can put on the same string behind it, and those 2 fingers won't affect the note because only the highest fretted note is going to be the one that sounds, but they still provide support to that finger to help give you more control, more power, just everything. Okay, so again, I'm just going to kind of noodle over this chord progression, this A minor chord progression, use the A minor pentatonic scale, maybe jump around into some neighboring positions, but try and pay attention to, when I'm doing any type of vibrato or any type of bends with either my second finger or third finger, and notice how, the other fingers just naturally kind of fall on the string behind it. So let's hear how that sounds. Alright, so right there I was kind of just trying to do, both of those techniques from part 1 and part 2. I was trying to show you how all the vibrato was done being the pull and then release, the pull, release, and then anytime I was using my second or third finger for bends or vibrato, I had multiple fingers all on the string behind the note that I was actually fretting. Okay, so, I don't know how obvious that was, but, I'm just trying to demonstrate these in real life, like, practical situations that you'll find yourself in as you're also noodling over chord progressions or whatever. All right, so that's the second thing. All right, so the third quick tip I want to give here is when you are soloing over progression, try to focus on giving the rhythm section more space to do its thing. So, you as the lead guitar player, you're playing your scale. You know that all the notes are part of the key, so therefore you know all the notes are going to sound good as long as the rhythm section is in the key that you're playing in. But you don't always have to be playing. All right, so a lot of the best sounding stuff takes place during those moments when you're not playing. All right, so essentially just play less. So I'm just going to give two quick examples back to back. The first one, I'm not going to give any space. I'm just going to run up and down the A minor pentatonic scale, maybe throwing in some additional notes from the A natural minor scale. It's all part of the key, but I'm not going to give any space. And then the second example, I'm going to, just do a little phrase, stop, give some space, do another little phrase, stop, give some space, and see if you can hear the difference. So here is the no space example. All right, it sounded okay. Everything was in key, and that's why it sounded okay, but it could sound better if I was to play less. So let me try to play less by giving the rhythm section some space to shine through. All right, so see how in that second example, I was kind of doing the call and response thing. I was doing a little, do a little riff, let the rhythm play. Do another little phrase or riff, let the rhythm play. So that's kind of the, the giving the space thing. So, an excellent example of this would be David Gilmour, one of my favorite guitar players. Listen to him, be like David Gilmour if at all possible, and your life will be way better. All right, so the fourth tip here is to take a phrase, a short phrase, and try playing it in as many different possible ways as you can. And, then maybe take that concept and then apply it to all of your, phrases that you have in your library. Generally, as guitar players, we kind of just come up with a bunch of phrases in our vocabulary that we play all the time, no matter what, rhythm section we happen to be soloing over. Maybe analyze each one of those phrases, or just take one or two of them and see as many different ways as you can possibly play that one phrase. That might help, add a new style to your playing that you may have not already discovered for yourself. So let me give you an example. So take a phrase like this. All right, so it's all just A minor pentatonic here. It's 3/5 on the E, 3/5 on the A, and then 5/7 on the A. So then 5 on the D, 7 on the A, and then 5 on the G, and then 7 on the D. All right, so I could play that over my looped rhythm that I have here. All right, so I can do that, but maybe I could take that riff and try to analyze it and see what I can do differently. So I'm starting out with a hammer. I'm going and then sliding. So maybe instead of starting out with a hammer, maybe I might want to start with a slide. All right, so that's one thing I could do. So instead of hammering, starting out from the 3 to the 5 on the low E, I instead slid. I did a slide there. So I slid from the 3 to the 5. So that's something very subtle. Another thing I might want to do is maybe once I get up to this 5th fret of the G string, instead of just playing this note, I may want to do a quarter step bend and kind of delay, maybe hold that note out a little longer. So instead of just doing this. So let me show you how that would sound. right, so I was doing a little quarter step bend, maybe even a little bit of vibrato on that note, just kind of subtly changing this riff around. I'm still playing the same notes, but playing it a little different. Another thing I might want to try is maybe when I get to that seventh fret, the fifth fret of the G string, instead of just playing that note, maybe I might want to play the fifth note of the G string and the B string before coming down to the seventh fret of the D string. So. All right, so right there, I was just kind of, another little subtle change. It still sounded very similar, but instead of just hitting one note, it's hitting two notes. Still part of the, that pentatonic framework right there, but just that one thing changes it up just subtly. All right, just kind of a little style change. So if I can take, several of my licks and phrases that I find myself doing all the time, and just kind of analyze them in this manner. How can I change things up? Maybe I can slide instead of hammer, or vice versa. Maybe I can do a little quarter step bend. Maybe I can hold a note out a little longer before going to the following note. Any little things like that, it's just all going to kind of just add to your overall style and feel and things like that. All right. So, it's a good exercise to do. That would be my fourth tip. Let's go on to the fifth one now. Okay, so the fifth tip that I have for you is to practice with the metronome as often as possible. Now, I know you hear this all the time, and you may not be sure why you're supposed to do this, but the whole idea of a metronome is that it programs your brain to feel subdivisions. So what I mean by subdivisions is when you have a metronome set to, say, 100 BPMs or something like that, there's 4 clicks. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So each one of those clicks is a quarter note. So a subdivision of quarter notes would then be eighth notes. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and those would be eighth notes. Further subdividing, that would be 16th notes. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a... Okay, so you're now 4 beats for every 1 click, 16th notes. You could further subdivide things into triplets. You could subdivide things into 16th note triplets, all kinds of other subdivisions, but I'm not going to get too much into that for this video. Let's just stick to quarter notes, eighth notes, and 16th notes. So once you kind of just practice, I have the same rhythm stored in my looper pedal, but now I have the metronome playing along with it set to quarter notes. So I'm going to do quarter notes first, then I'm going to do eighth notes, then I'm going to do 16th notes. So that'll kind of program my brain to feel what each one of those feels like. And then I can go and kind of start noodling around, improvising, but I'll know what 16th notes feels like. So if I want to do like a quick little lick or phrase or something like that at a 16th note, type of pace, I'll know exactly what that is because I just practiced that. So let me show you what I mean. So starting with quarter notes. All right, so that was just a quick little demo of, playing first quarter notes, then eighth notes, then 16th notes, and then I started to just kind of noodle around within the scale, and, I kind of slowed down, and then when I wanted to speed up a little bit, the speeding up part was all done to 16th notes. So I didn't need to count. I wasn't necessarily counting, but because I just went through that process of practicing, what a 16th note subdivision felt like, I was able to, implement that same type of rhythm into my noodling, all right, if that makes any sense. So, when you hear these guys that are just playing and they're just super, they're playing really fast and everything just sounds so tight and so perfect and so accurate, I would guarantee that these guys went through the time, they put the work in, and they practiced to a metronome. They started out slow, they got the feeling of these subdivisions, and they kept building up their speed, getting faster and faster and faster, and they just locked that feeling into their brain. That way, once they get to the point, where they're just kind of noodling around, soloing, improvising, and they want to at any point switch to, fast type of playing, they can do so because they know what that feels like. All right, so metronome is like training for your brain. It's just, I can't really describe it any other way. Great example of this would be Joe Bonamassa. I love listening to Joe Bonamassa play. He's so soulful, so bluesy, but when he gets fast, when he starts shredding, everything is so perfect. Every single note is just so perfectly timed, and I would bet tons of money that he definitely practices to a metronome very regularly. I can't prove that, but I mean, just listening to the way he plays, he sounds like a person that has done this necessary training. That's how he's so tight with his with his leads being so accurately in time. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. That was my 5th tip: practice to a metronome. Do it as often as possible, and it will help you. So that's going to conclude this video. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask, and I'll be glad to get back to you. Thanks.